Hi, Molly.
Hi.
Today I would like to speak with you about your piece, perspective. Can you
Mhm.
give maybe short history of the piece? Who commissioned the piece?
Mhm.
What is concept behind the piece?
Mhm. Sure. The piece began, I guess, about 3 years ago now, during a fellowship, year-long fellowship I had in Washington, D.C., that was more focused towards art and social impact. And during my time in DC, I had a conversation with the legendary disability activist Judy Heumann, who asked why I refer to my left hand as weak. And my left hand was nearly amputated in a car accident about 20 years ago. So since the accident, I really journeyed from like denying my disability to embracing it. And Judy's question really kind of struck me because I knew that I always referred to it as weak or just kind of tried to say like, oh, I have a weaker left side if someone asked why I couldn't do something or if I had to explain at the forefront why I couldn't lift something, etc. And I don't think Judy's question was saying I should deny weakness altogether, but really prompted me to think about what weakness is to individuals across a range of disabilities and further experiences. So I kind of set this project in motion where I asked disabled interviewees questions like, "What is weakness for you?" And expanding to further questions and concepts that are really, I feel like, central to the disabled experience, like what is access for you, what is care for you, and more. And yeah, and then the project has taken a couple iterations thus far, like some more geographically centered on certain areas. Yeah. Mhm.
And this is not concept piece, right?
Yeah, it's more of a, like I would say, installation work. I try to keep it as flexible as possible, though. Like I have performed with it in concert or selections from it. I guess another element to mention is it has these kind of each audio track. So I guess you hear the interviewees' voices basically with my musical underscoring. And then I created these accompanying videos, which feature kind of open caption like text of their responses to underscore accessibility with the project. So kind of multiple sensory outputs of the material. So sometimes I perform with those videos. The project's been like a website. It's also seen a dance-like performance. But I'd say the ideal format is probably installation.
Okay, so it's like installation. It's like a YouTube project, right? And sometimes even you can perform in concerts.
Yeah, so sometimes I'll perform with it as well. Mhm.
Um, and what kind of instruments are used or
Sure, yeah. So the musical underscoring includes like my voice and my vintage toy organ instrument, which I really love because this organ instrument kind of fits my disability well, especially my impaired left hand. It has chord buttons on the left hand side and a keyboard part on the right hand side. So it feels very like natural for me to perform on. So it's an instrument I've used a lot in my work as a performer, especially more disability focused work. So that musical underscoring again includes my voice, the organ, and kind of like electronic layering of both sources.
and no, I see there is several parts, right? There's more than eight, or how many parts are in the piece?
There's actually, I would say for the whole project, I was thinking like 15
15.
tracks in a way. Yeah. But on this kind of initial album version, there's 12, and then there will be a supplemental kind of EP release with the other three tracks. Since those were created with a dance company, a little more specific.
Got
Yeah.
it. And how you choose what story behind the title?
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. It's hard to, it was like a couple of years ago that I named the project one because initially I was building it as an installation for this kind of public art festival, which then got canceled with COVID. But I guess it just kind of came to me, to be honest, because obviously I was kind of asking these people like, or the interviewees for their like quote unquote perspective on these questions that I was asking, like what is access for you, etc. And I think I was striving towards a very simple and hopefully straightforward title.
And what is the main message of this installation, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think with all my work, to be honest, I hope to not just like emphasize one main message or answer is our way to think. I like art that really asks more questions and kind of opens up realms of understanding and possibility. But I would hope that I guess the message or understanding would just be to like gain a more up close understanding of disability and the disabled experience. I think disability is so often like stigmatized and feared, and disabled individuals and communities are often isolated from society overall. And so with that, with this project, I hope to at least attempt to bridge the gap a little bit between society and disability, and really cherish the disabled experience as one that all can relate to. I feel like it's one of the only identities that's temporary to permanent, congenital to acquired, visible to invisible. So one that's really available to all, yeah, and can learn from and cherish.
And what is the logic behind this 15, right, parts?
Sorry, what was that? What was it?
What is the logic, right? How you, because at least in the internet, I understand that each part responds to some question, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But maybe there is some other logic, right? What is logic? Why 15 and why those questions?
Sure. Yeah. So the project has taken kind of three main iterations thus far. So the first iteration was 8 questions that I began in DC, Washington, DC, mainly with interviewees based there. And I came up with these questions and concepts that, like starting from that weakness question and then expanding to further questions and concepts again that I feel like were really central to the disabled experience from what I had learned from my own like disability studies and disability activism and artistry. So some questions like weakness, I chose just the opposite, like strength too, to kind of ask both sides of the question, if you will. Or questions like access and accessibility, which is definitely really central to disability culture, and even more controversial questions like cure, which I was curious to get people's thoughts on as well.
Yeah.
And then there's 4 questions at the end of the album that are resilience, isolation, connection, and darkness, which were created as part of a more winter-focused iteration of the project, which was commissioned last year by the Great Northern Festival in Minnesota. So that festival has more of a winter theme to it. So as part of that commission, I again chose questions and concepts that are more related to winter, to ask the disabled interviewees.
Okay, got it. And can you just like name each question, right, for listener? So
Sure,
the first,
yeah.
how it starts.
Oh, sure. So it's like, what is access for you? What is care for you? What is control? Weakness, strength, cure, interdependence, assumption. What is resilience for you? Isolation, connection, darkness. And then the last 3 tracks, I asked the same question I had asked previously, but this was with a disability dance group in Boise, Idaho. So those are, what is interdependence for you? What is strength for you? And what is care for you?
Yes, got it. And these questions are coming from your own experience, right? It's like your questions of which is important for you, right? Or
Definitely, I think, and just I would say in my wider like reading of disability studies literature, and learning from disability activists and artists overall.
it was like, so you made some research, and based on the research, you use like those questions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. And what was logic? Because I don't know how it's displayed in installation, but in your webpage there is some kind of logic, right? So at least, right? So you need to start with some sequences, right? Are there
Yeah.
some kind of internal dramaturgy of that as well, or?
There's definitely like with the order of the question. Yeah, so definitely with especially the first 8 questions I asked, and the subsequent 4 for the Minnesota edition, I tried to start with I don't want to say easy questions, but more relatable questions for disabled people, like what is access for you? What is resilience for you? and then kind of ease into, I would say, the harder questions or more controversial ones like cure, interdependence, weakness, and then kind of ease out from that. The same thing with the Minnesota one, like connection, isolation, darkness, the last one. So I tried to order them in a way that, at least in my opinion, would just, yeah, again, kind of ease into the interview, into the concepts I was getting at. Yeah, and I always told the interviewees that they could answer all the questions, they could answer none of them, or they don't have to answer all of them. The answers could be as long or as short as they want. Yeah.
But basically, right, as I understand, you asked the questions. So it was like very like research oriented. You asked the questions to the people with disabilities, and you recorded the answers, and from the answers you build the speech, right? So literally, right? So that we hear the voices, and etc.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And what was the idea? How you connect the music, right? To are there like some musical some kind of, let's say, some musical dramaturgy as well, to which question what kind of music you add, or
Yeah, it was interesting because I'd never done a composition like this before. So I remember, and still to this day, when I do new iterations of it, I feel very nervous, like writing the music, because it's just very challenging, or because I want to honor those voices as authentically as possible. Like I almost feel like the voices could be heard without music and be just as interesting. But I feel like the music is kind of my answer to the questions in a way, without trying to, superimpose my own thoughts onto the interviewees' responses. But I basically, between the sections, I tried to vary it between musical content. Like if one section was a little more slower and kind of drony, then the next section have it a little more upbeat, or just not to have it as super continuous or super monotonous, if that makes sense. And then also some sections and then also just to change like what takes primacy in the music, like some are more vocal heavy, some more organ heavy, some are even just more drum tracks, like the control one, there's like no voice. And then also just to play with some musical gestures from it as well, like in the cure section, there's like an oscillating major and minor chord that almost sounds like you could be at a fair or a fantasy land or something. And to me, that suggests that cure is a fantasy in a way, like it can never really be achieved. So that was kind of my own answer to the questions. But I would say overall with composing it, though, I was trying to be as intuitive as possible to what I felt like the music was telling me, once I ordered the interviewee voices, etc. And again, not trying to superimpose my own like structure on it or musical ones, kind of.
yes, but this musical idea is at least this section what I have heard, it's a little bit from minimalistic or post minimalistic, right? A lot of beat, a lot of repetition.
Yeah, definitely. My music is pretty repetitious overall, but
And but there is video as well, right? How you add the video, and what is the logic of video? How's the video? What kind of sensorial experience you would like to create with these videos?
Yeah, I think the video, well, I always knew when I started the project that I wanted to create a video element, just because I'd been exploring a lot of accessibility in my work. And by accessibility, I mean having kind of multiple sensory outputs of the work, especially with artistic content. So having the oral output with my musical content, but then that visual output, especially with the captions, which are helpful for deaf and hard of hearing audiences. And I was working with a project curator, Sandy Gutman, and we are talking about, I think, the videos and what they would look like. And it was, I believe, her idea to have this format of the question at the top and their answers kind of scrolling on the bottom, which kind of reflect caption format. Like sometimes there's closed captions, open captions. And generally, I'd say a lot of accessibility facets or accommodation, like captioning or sign language interpretation, are viewed as kind of like add-ons to artistic work or any content, and kind of just placed on at the end, like not really aesthetically considered. And so with this, I love Sandy's idea of, the placement of them and just having that be the sole visual image, really to emphasize their words, of course, emphasize accessibility. And also I kind of like the idea of in the middle is just black or dark, and just to leave it up to the viewer's imagination, really, like who the interviewee is, maybe, or not to place a lot of other visual information there. So that was like my thinking as well. And even I created it during like COVID, the onset of COVID, started creating these videos. And I loved how when I expanded the video on a laptop, it took up all the black, you felt like you didn't see the video frame anymore, which I really like too, especially thinking about sharing the videos with Zoom talks, etc. So I like that aesthetic as well.
And what is the process of composing, right? How you started and
How I started composing.
yes, how you started and what kind of stages you go through for particularly this piece.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my process first was I pulled in all the interviews I did, or did all the interviews, had the recordings. Then I would select the highlights from each interviewee, and try to sparse it down. And then I would kind of compile it into each section, like access, care, etc. Pull the highlights in, probably do another round of edits, because I was trying to make each section, I don't know, say roughly 2 to 6 minutes or something, kind of like bite size or not super long. And then I would, once I finalized the highlights, I would put it in kind of an order that I felt makes sense. Again, it was very intuitive, but I was trying to sometimes place interviewing answers that were similar next to each other so they could kind of proceed or develop on one another, or the opposite, like if someone contradicted each other, to place that next to each other as well, to show, again, just this diversity of the disabled experience and disability viewpoints. And then from there, once I had the order, I added musical underscoring, usually in like kind of MIDI first. This was all my Logic software. I would do it in MIDI format, then eventually record it with my organ instrument, etc., process it, have it mixed and mastered, etc.
So, and what kind of softwares you use? Is it me?
Yeah, I used Logic Pro and then Sibelius. Like for the project isn't super notated, but sometimes I would create a score if I was recording myself, so I could read off score.
And for videos?
Adobe Premiere.
And how long it took all the process?
Oh, it's hard to say. I think is it. Sorry, I'm just thinking because I feel like I came back to it at different points. I think the first iteration maybe took about 7 months or so, and then the second one 4 or 5 months, like the one in Minnesota. The one in Idaho I did in 1 month because I was very focused at a residency there. But again, it's hard to say because I've been coming back and forth to the project, and I usually work on multiple different things at a time. So.
What roles in this piece? What roles makes? What roles? What role is for video, right?
Yeah, or sorry, what would you say? They're all for video.
Yes, but what is role for of video right here?
The role. Yeah, I mean, definitely one, the accessibility component, like providing that visual output of the oral content, especially the interviewees' voices. But I'd say, and then beyond that, again, just kind of emphasizing open captions, like as an artistic output in of itself. And hopefully just to create a more immersive experience for the audience.
Would this work would be different if you put only like sound? It would be only
Yeah,
sound only.
yeah, and I'm sure many people might listen to the album that way, just with sound, which is definitely fine with me. I think just the ideal format. I mean, the really ideal format is a in-person installation. I think really being
Yes.
immersed in the sound with really good sound system, very dark room, and
But would it be different? Would it be different piece without video?
Um, yeah, I think so. For me, I don't think it would be as complete. I think even when I started making the videos, that was kind of the last step of the first iteration for a presentation I was doing, and I felt like it really made their words come alive. I think the combination of the oral and the visual. So.
And can you imagine the same piece but without sound, only video?
Um, Yeah, I think, I mean, of course, that's how many deaf or hard of hearing audiences would view it anyway. So, I mean, I hope it would still be effective. It'd just be kind of one part of the project in a way.
And could you imagine that all 15 pieces could be concert pieces? Not
Uh,
installation, but all 15 like concert piece?
oh, yeah. I'd be interested in that in the future. I've actually started creating more instrumental versions of some of the tracks, like for more for improvising musicians to play with the voices, like as a one fixed media track, or to trigger the voice samples individually and then add musical layers on top of it, which I'm kind of just at the start of experimenting with, but I really like that prospect to hopefully open the project up to further musicians, like besides myself, to play with it.
And what was what? Because as I understand, right? So that maybe recorded, like it was you mostly performed
Mhm.
was musician, but there was some video artist with whom you worked, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe somebody else uh, were involved in the process of this creative process.
For these videos, for this project, I was the only one making the videos, so that was me,
So
basically.
it was you video and you sound and you as performer, right? As
Yeah,
composer, video maker, and performer.
yeah. I mean, I have to give credit to, I mean, the curator, Sandy Gutman, provided a lot of great consultation, and also my sound engineer, Michael Hammond, like mixed and mastered all the tracks. So he made them sound good.
And
Mhm.
what was the experience for you that you did all this, all you fulfill all these three roles on your own? How it is?
Definitely. I think I'm a little bit, I think with the video aspect, I'm a little bit of a control freak sometimes, I think, or it's nice to, I think, over the timing and of the voices, and especially since it's fairly simple, like it's just the text captions. For me, is more just getting the timing right with the track. Um, and it's nice to have control over it, I think, more because when I do new installation or performance of it, I can edit it myself as well if it needs edits, or with the video format, except for, et cetera, with the frame.
And how, okay, you said, right, that your curator and sound engineer, that you work with them, how collaboration with them shaped the piece? Or
Yeah, well, the curator definitely, or she had the idea of that the open text like videos or open caption videos, excuse me, the placement of the text. And she has definitely more of a visual art background, which is really great for this project, I think, for her to add that component. And then my engineer, Michael Hammond, I've been working with for many years. So he like mixed and mastered all the tracks for the album release and also for the installation we had in Minnesota in person.
uh, uh, and um, and what was your biggest free learnings, right, during this piece?
Definitely because most of it was not notated in a way, I would say. Like I was writing straight into Logic software, which I'm not super comfortable with, I would say. Or like even today when I do it, it's not like the immediate thing I want to do in a way, if that makes sense. So I think that was my biggest learning curve or challenge. Mhm.
And what would you, this last question, what would you suggest, what would you suggest uh, to uh, to other composers um, regarding how to make this research-oriented pieces?
Oh, I'd have to think about it. I think one would just to be like as authentic, ethical, and transparent as possible with the participants. And I'm not saying I've mastered that or I'm still learning in that regard. Like I think right before I started the project, I realized that I should have like a contract with the participants or just a simple consent form, like with the interviews, that so then I can use their interviews for presentations with the project, etc. Ideally, I'd like to pay the participants as well for their participation. I think just being as clear as possible about how the material will be used, and trying to highlight their viewpoints as much as possible too. Like, for example, I created a web page for the project this summer on my website with all the interviewee names and bios, and then the full recordings and transcripts of the interviews conducted, just to hopefully honor their participation as much as possible. As I know that when I edit down the interviews for each section, it's definitely biased or subjective to how I edit it down to whatever I think sounds interesting, but I want to open it up for those that are interested. They can listen to the whole interview conducted.
Thank you very much, Molly, for this interview.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.